Hello and welcome to Mandibil. It's starting to become evening where I live, and it might be a little dark in the little window where I'm sitting. So I thought that wouldn't be too much of a problem. I would take next step in my deconstruction of Keith Frankish's series on illusionism. And we are about 25 and a half minutes into Lection 1, the illusionist option. And it's been a while since I made the last one, and I may be sort of out of touch with what was being talked about in the last part. But I remember this picture quite vividly because this actually is a presentation or a representation of the hard problem of consciousness, or what not realizing that there is a hard problem will make you present, right? Because he is saying that before anything arrives in his mind, he already knows there's an apple, right? Maybe there's something about things going very fast. It goes so fast in the conceptualization and experience, so it's almost like it must be there. It's sort of in an instant, but it can't be, right? It can't be. If you make this presentation of a skull and a brain and eyes and sensory things traveling this way, then the first time anybody in the history of living things on Earth had any kind of experience, whatever that might be, based on senses, let's say, right? Which would be qualia, right? That's another word for qualia. There was nothing in the brain that would be able to say, that's an apple. Or you could say, if you have an experience that your mind trains itself to say that's an apple. Yes, right? But that doesn't mean that if you interpret that experience as being something outside yourself, that apple is actually outside yourself also, right? It can't be. There might be something which the experience in the mind is a placeholder of, right? So this is clearly that if you experience an apple, the experience must then be in your brain, in your mind. And if it's in your mind, it can't be out there in front of his forehead, right? There is no apple out in front of your forehead. The apple is inside you, even if you feel that you're looking at it. But that's just an experiential representation of a conjured up, you could say an illusion, but I don't like the term illusion in this context. A conjured up presentation based on senses, not based on apples, right? The apple is a mental presentation that seems to work to some end, right? So it's very, very problematic that philosophers can't see this problem, right? You are not experiencing the outside. There might be something out there, right? There might be an outside, and there might be something outside that is somehow responsible for you having the experience of apple, right? I can remember apples, what I consider like 50 years ago, right, when I was a child. And I've experienced apples, every week since, right? So it's like, yes, apples exist. But what I have access to is that representation of something I might consider being outside myself. But from that follows, that experience I have then cannot be that thing outside myself, right? Now, if Keith Frankish cannot see this, or can identify the paradox that is built into this kind of thinking, well, he should be defunded immediately, right? He should be defunded. Why is he spending somebody else's money on, thinking about things that is incorrect, right? So, but he's not the only one, right? It's like 90% of philosophers should possibly be defunded based on this alone. Okay, let's head further into it.
Then mechanisms of attention select some of this information to be shared widely with other brain systems, to be globally broadcast. That's the phrase that's commonly used here. So this
globally broadcast? What is that? I don't know about this. Whatever he thinks is going on in the brain, that's just some kind of abstraction from neuroscience or whatever it's called, where you can see, oh, this part of the brain lights up when you see an apple or whatever, right?
Information that's targeted by attention that seems to be important is shared with systems for memory, emotion, reasoning, language, enabling you to report the information, motor control, and so on. So this information gets to have a lot of influence within the brain. And these systems then generate a vast array of reactions. Some of this may involve overt reactions, behavior. But the bulk of these reactions will be internal psychological ones, changes in new memories being formed, associations being activated, and a vast array of changes to your internal dispositions to react to future stimuli. So the reactions to one round of stimulation will subtly adjust in hugely complex ways how you will respond to the next round. So we can think of this as...
Yeah, you might have a rationalization that when you see an apple, you want to bring that apple to your mouth or something like that, and then you expect some new qualia, which is apple juice, whatever, right? The taste of apple and so on. But you don't know you will have those experiences until you have them, right? That, to step a bit into epistemology, is that when you expect to have some experience, and we call that if we call that experience a kind of knowledge, well, you don't have that knowledge until you actually have that experience, right? Then you have knowledge of that experience. I would go a step further and say the only thing that can be knowledge is the concepts that are, or the cognitions based on the concepts, right? The cognition of apple, right? That you take a bite of the apple or something else doesn't change the knowledge of apple. It might change your idea of the quality of the apple, but that's something else. That's your judgment and so on, right? You could say, is it if you take a bite of an apple and put that bite next to the apple on the table, do you have an apple and a bite of an apple? I would say maybe you could, right? I wouldn't say there's a hard line there between knowledge and not knowledge. But I would say for it to be knowledge, it has to be cognized, right? And then drawing a line when something is cognized and when it's not cognized, that might be an individual interpretation that you have to some degree agree with other people on, right? And maybe not if they have a too narrow or too wide understanding of this delineation, you might choose not to interact with them, right? That's how it should be, in my opinion.
A cyclical process. Information comes in, is processed, is globally broadcast.
I don't like he's saying information. That's another problem that a guy like Bernardo Kastrup and most even a guy like Bernardo Kastrup, who's presumably an idealist, say that there's coming information in, right? How do you know that something is information? I mean, yes, you can label what you experience as information, but you're not adding anything. If you say, I'm experiencing apple, right, or I'm cognizing apple, and then you say, that is information, what are you adding to it by calling it information? And how do you get to add that new status for this cognition? Why do you get to say that it's information? You might value the cognition, but there's nothing about you valuing the cognition that gets to some kind of objective understanding of information, right? So something you calling something or information is implicitly saying that everybody who has this kind of experience is or should be considering it information. Who are you to tell people what is information, right? Because there's nothing about the experience itself that necessitates you drawing the conclusion that it's information. I think that's the problem of a priori knowledge, right? That you think that you're handed some information from the outside. No, everything is made from the inside, right? A photon arriving through your eyes cannot be whatever it is that you think is out there, right? It's not coded, it's not encoded so that your mind has been created in such a way that when it receives this message from the outside, the brain knows that it should represent it as an apple so that you know that that apple is out there or something like that, right? And that's also another problem with this presentation. If you already know there's an apple out there, why the hell do you need another experience of it, right? If you have an external experience of apple, why do you need to, fiddle around with photons and eyes and ears and whatever you need and taste and so on to get to understanding that apple? If you already know it's an apple, why do you need an experience of it also, right? And if you are certain that it's an apple or some kind of high level of knowledge, and that experience you can then create in your mind of it is sort of a lesser kind, which is sort of the same as saying your qualia, you must be eliminated, right? It's like they're not important, right? Because I already know it's an apple. Then I'm having a hard time understanding how you explain why there is a need for an experience, right? If you already know there's an apple out there. Well, the point is you don't know there's an apple there. The apple only appears in your brain, right? That's where it originated. It didn't arrive through your eyes so that your brain knew that there was an apple out there, right? And even if the apple traveled through your eyes, the first time you experienced apple, it would be some part of your mind then, right? Then it would no longer be out there. So it's just like when first you see this clearly, everybody talking in this fashion, as Keith Frankish and most other philosophers do, sounds completely crazy, right? It's completely crazy. And yet, that's what most people, or most philosophers, tend to think is the correct way of thinking metaphysically, right?
Generates a huge range of reactions, subtle changes to internal state that then shape how the next round of information is processed, the next, the reactions that are generated to the next round of information.
Yes, I understand, and I have certain sympathy for this kind of thinking, that it's sort of an iteration where you move a bit and then you observe, you move a bit. When you drive your car, you don't just make a plan, close your eyes and drive, right? You drive in a general direction that you need to go, and then you adjust, you observe, adjust, observe, adjust, observe, adjust, and so on, right? Based on an expectation of what is going to be an experience, or expecting to be an experience you can act upon, or that you can experience in such a way that you can reach a change in your behavior or create an action that will conform to your idea of how this should unfold, right? So that might be a little convoluted way of putting it, but I think when you're driving a car, that's what you're doing, right? You don't expect the road to suddenly disappear, or, I'm not saying I can tell you that it won't disappear, but when I drive my car, I don't expect I'm sort of taking the chance, right? It's a qualified crystal ball, right? So
it's a continual engagement with your environment. Active engagement with your environment. Information and...
I'm sorry, I had a bit of homemade green Thai curry, and it sort of it was pretty strong. So I'm coughing a bit. I don't know actually why. There's a bit of chili going down.
Reaction, cycling round. All of this is immensely complex. It involves interactions among billions, literally billions of brain cells. And we still have only the sketchiest idea of what is happening or how it is being done. Still, none of it looks miraculous. We can divide it all up into various tasks that the brain is doing, detecting certain features, sharing information about these features, using this information to produce reactions of various kinds, and so on. We can break it all down into tasks. We can describe it as the brain doing things, performing functions. And
it's just incredible, really, right? He's talking about this thing that circles around inside his mind, apparently. And then, but the apple is outside. So he's basically saying in this drawing that he's not experiencing an apple, right? The apple is outside his mind. Everything is sort of revolving inside that mind there, or that's at least my interpretation of it. So why is the apple out there? It must be a part of that, whatever that is sort of information reaction. So it's like everything he experiences is outside himself. And because it's out there, it doesn't matter that it has qualia, like the apple is red, even though he presents it in colors and shapes, right? And maybe shape is not a qualia, but, that's up for discussion, right? So what is it that is information in there, right? What is that? What is that? What is the information? If it's not a color and it's not an object, what is it? I don't understand what it is. Because if all of that which you experience is out there, what the hell is that going on in there, right? Is it a sort of a code? Or, what is it? I don't understand, because I feel that I'm experiencing something inside, right? I might have something behind the screen of experience, which is my wanting to eat something, or, enjoy a sunset, or whatever it is, right? That's sort of an emotional thing going on behind the curtain, so to say, right? And that might be a part of that information he's talking about. And when I have this experience of a sunset, I want to go up on a hill and watch it, or something like that, right? That's a reaction to the experience, or something like that. And I'm walking up there, and I'm, reacting, having information, reacting. But that information are all these objects that he has placed outside himself, right? And I'm also not sure I like this. I like it to some extent, because it's also to some extent a part of my thinking, that you're constantly reiterating this experience with your reactions, right? I'm kind of sympathetic to that, because I think it could be an advantageous way of presenting it. But I don't like that apple is out there, right? It has to be a part of that, what is called information. He just don't know that it's information, right? He sees an apple, and then he reacts. He doesn't need to call it information, right? What he might do is call it a cognition. He's cognizing apple. And why he cognizes apple, well, he cannot say. But these cognitions seems to be of some importance, because otherwise you would just have your qualia, right? But because the mind sort of, let's say, identifies, or not identifying, right? Also a bad word to use. It cognizes from the qualia what we call objects, like an apple. Why it does that? There's no way to tell. It just does that, right? And sort of over, as we grow up, we are told that this, when you experience this object, it's called an apple, and you can use it for apple pies and throw at your doctor or whatever you want to do with it, right? That's the cognitive part of the experience, right? The cognitions is what I call knowledge, right? And that's what you call information. I will stretch it that far, right? But information is some kind of classification of these concepts, right? Or cognitions. And you're sort of implicitly adding something by presenting it with a new word or adding a term called information to it, as if somebody has classified it and called it important, and therefore you called it information. No, there's nothing about it in itself that gets you to say this is information. I might want to classify it as what I would call information, fine. But that's up to me to do, right? That's not for you to tell me that an apple is information, right? So it's just a habitual thinking to a large extent.
When we're talking about functions, we're talking about things that we kind of know.
And I'm also he is sort of droningly boring, right? I mean, I would rather have, Bernardo Kastrup or Stefan Molyneux. At least they're sort of more energetic in their, and more imaginative or something like that. He is droningly boring to listen to, right? Oh, I guess he can't help that, but doesn't help me either.
Know how to explain. There's no deep mystery about how the brain performs various functions. We just have to find mechanisms in the brain to explain how it performs, and we just have to find mechanisms in the brain which do the right work, which implement the function, mechanisms that perform the task. So to take an example, here's think about a television set, an old-fashioned cathode ray television set. How this performs a function, the function of converting incoming radio waves, which I guess come in at the back here, number 13.
Bad example, because those who create television sets, they have an idea of this signal came from this object, and for that to be making any sense on the screen, it has to be presented this way, right? But the TV screen in your mind never had that information. It doesn't know what it's doing. It has no reference to what it's doing. It's doing it because it works, not because it is supposed to do it, right? It is, by all reasonable guesses, based on evolution. Some little, amoeba in the Cambrian explosion had by chance the first experience, and when it had that experience, it wagged its tail in a certain fashion. That made it less likely to be eaten, or something like that. I'm just, riffing, right? And because it had that, it had success. So those that had less likelihood of being eaten would be more likely to survive. It's basically the same thing, right? And then they would have offspring that would have the same ability, and some mutation would create an even more elaborate experience, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. And now we have this extremely elaborate experience of, I have my movie collection and my TV screen and my laptop and my glass of juice and whatever, right? Very sort of quite I wouldn't say complicated, but sort of it has this, let's say, 3D feel and, all the 5 different senses and all that, right? But still, there's nothing about it that is information, because the mind that creates this has never had any manual for how to create this thing, right? It just does it because it works for fighting, fleeing, fucking, and feeding, right? It's not there to tell you about some external world. It's there to help you. You're blindfolded. You're having this virtual reality, sort of, right? It's not a good comparison, but still it's the best you can maybe use, right? Because you're blindfolded, but it helps you more than having nothing. Having this experience makes you less likely is more beneficial for your survival, so to say, right? That's why it's there. It's not there to explain some kind of external world, right? That's ridiculous, man, right?
The screen is at the back here in this, and the back of the television is at the front of the picture. So it performs the function of converting incoming radio waves into a moving picture shown on the screen at the back. How does it do that? How does it perform that function? Well, very roughly, it's something like this. The signal is converted into a stream of electrons.
I'm jumping ahead of this explanation.
To sweep.
I'm not interested in lectures about old TV screens.
How the step down 11.
Was they called CRT? CRT?
They can't perform
televisions.
Thanks in large. And again, simplifying greatly, here's the idea. A computer contains symbols. These are just physical states, which stand for or represent things in the world. Now, these symbols are nothing special at all. They're not pictures of the world. They might simply be combinations of strings of ones and zeros stored in memory. Ultimately, just settings of switches on or off, if you like.
There are no ones and zeros, right? That's just a mental mathematical representation of a binary numbering system. But there are no ones and zeros in the chip or in the meat of this calculator, right? There are no ones and zeros. That's a representation that is purely abstract, right? There might be some kind of memory that has long and short, but I'm not even certain about that, or sure about that. I don't like the term certainty. That would be some kind of, engineer, or if those who knows about this kind of electronics, right? So it's like, be careful with these abstractions, right? It's like, it's sort of, yeah, it's just there's an apple there, and then it's like a computer, and then, there's like a TV screen, and then solved. Come on, man. You are a philosopher, man. Come on, you can do better than this, right?
Like, nothing very fancy at all. And the machine manipulates these symbols. It's programmed, it's instructed to manipulate these symbols according to formal rules. By formal rules, I mean they're rules that are defined over the physical properties of the symbol. So it's programmed so that when it gets a certain combination of symbols and another combination, then it produces a third combination. Okay, so it might be something like that. When those first two patterns are activated, those first two symbol patterns are activated, the machine produces the third one. Now, the crucial point about this is the computer has no idea at all what these symbols mean. It's just churning.
No, but these symbols are counting. Be careful not to confuse numbering with code or something like that. These are, if you use a binary number system, the symbol for a certain number is this or that, a certain conglomeration of zeros and ones, as he uses to present it here, right? But these are just a number. If you took hexadecimal or decimal or on your 7-number system or 60-number system, you will just have another symbol, but it would be the same number, right? We're just used to looking at certain symbols as being a number, but it's a symbol for a number, for a counting number, right? The number 12 is just the decimal number system for when you count what we call 12 objects of the same kind, right? If you count and you get to have a presentation of objects which you in the decimal number system count to 12, then if you are counting in the binary number system, it will be called whatever 01101 or something like that. It would just be the same number. It's just a different symbol because it's another base for the numbering system. But it's basically the same number, just with a different symbol. And the symbol is that it's binary or hexadecimal or decimal or whatever, right? So, okay, let's not go too much into that.
Planning out sequences according to some rules it's been given. Nevertheless, if these processes mirror relations between the things the symbol...
I might just add, there's no problem in making a computer working on a 60-decimal system, or what's it called? 60, like the Babylonians, but it would be very cumbersome. The smart thing about the binary is that it works with these chips that can be either on or off, right? Transistors or whatever the hell it's called, right? They're on and off, so they just have to have large binary numbers instead of having smaller number symbols using a higher base, like decimal, right? Which has 10 base symbols, right? So two different, then it works with being on or off. And that's advantageous when you're making computers, right? You're just going into very, very, very huge number symbols as you get writing 2,300,000,000,000 and a billion and million and so on in binary is completely ridiculously large, right?
Symbols represent, then they will implement reasoning processes. So suppose that pattern of symbols there represented states of the world. So the first pattern represented the fact that all men are mortal, the second one represented the fact that Socrates is a man, and the third represented the conclusion that Socrates is mortal.
Now this is a bit of a stretch, right? Adding two numbers is saying I'm counting this and then I'm counting that. That would be the same as mixing it all up and counting everything. I would reach the same number. What's the law, the mathematical law of addition? I don't remember the law of identity. I don't remember. I don't remember the name. But deductive logic is compared to deductive logic. It's not all men are mortal plus Socrates is the man equals Socrates. Now this is sort of scary that he's making this comparison, right? He is sort of mixing, East and West, or like it's two different things he's comparing as if they're basically the same. It doesn't work, right? This is bad logic, bad, metaphysics, or bad philosophy in general.
If the computer did this, and would do it with similar patterns of symbols that represented other, say...
I mean, basically, these numbers are representations of counting. You're counting to the first number, and then you are also counting. If you have a bunch of bananas, right, and then you split those bananas up in two piles, then you count the one, and then you count the other, and then you say, "Oh, I have so many bananas." But that would be the same as piling everything together and then start counting. You should reach the same number. That's what that law says. That's not deductive logic, right? It's fucking stupid, man, right? I can't believe how bad it is, man, right? And I know I've said this, I can't believe how bad it is, both about this guy and Bernardo Castro and Stefan Molyneux, right? What kind of crazy world am I living in, man, where people have trouble doing good, rigid, basic philosophy and get it wrong, right?
Plato being a man or whatever, and produce a symbol representing Plato being mortal and so on. Then, so if it did this systematically, the computer that would be implementing a reasoning process. It would be taking certain inputs and producing outputs that were logical conclusions from the inputs given the interpretation. Of course, this all depends on getting the symbols to match up with states of...
What is he getting at? I feel we're not talking about, is this supposed to be an analogy or metaphor for what is going on in the mind and the qualia and whatever? What are we doing? What is the illusion about this? The illusionist option? What is this illusionist? I don't get it. Why don't you get to the point, right? Instead of talking about calculators and comparing it to deductive reasoning.
Of the world, okay. So we've got to have symbols that represent things like men and mortality or whatever, and can be recombined to express things like all men being mortal. And the general idea here is, again, you can do this by making the symbols causally sensitive to states of the world. So perhaps you hook up the computer to some kind of sensor that can detect features of the world and produces symbols that stand for those features. So maybe you hook up your computer to say to an animal, to a detector for animals. It can detect different kinds of animals. It's a video camera with simple sort of processing.
Oh, you're boring, man.
That can detect different kind of animals.
Oh, I'm stepping ahead.
Say 4 o'clock. According to rules. So this shows in principle how minds could be mechanized. The idea is that this sort of stuff could be going on behind the scenes in producing our intelligent behavior. I mean, think about when you're having a conversation with...
Behind the scenes? What is behind the scenes? Where is that behind? Is that also in your mind or what? It's not really clear to me.
With somebody, you rarely consciously think up the words. The words are coming to you spontaneously. But hopefully, if you're doing well in the conversation, they will be appropriate words. They will be rational responses to what's being said to you. Some mechanisms must be selecting these responses and activating the words. And maybe this is something like this kind of computational process going on in your brain. Not one you're aware of. Your brain itself doesn't understand the words. Your brain is performing computations that produce words that make sense in the context, because that's how it's been trained up to do. That's what it's been trained up to do. Now, I'm not suggesting your brain really is a computer in that sense, but what the idea then is that mental state.
So it's basically just guessing what is behind that curtain going on. So he says there's something going on in his mind that he doesn't have access to. But he thinks it's like a computer. Okay. Who gives a crap what he thinks about that which he does not have access to? Right? It's again this thing that philosophers are so concerned about anything but their experiences or their qualia, right? The direct experience that everybody seems to be using all the time in their waking hours is sort of not important for a philosopher. No. We don't need that to be every day. No, we have to do the big thing of what is going on behind the curtains and so on, right? Fuck you, man.
It's like beliefs and so on, could just be symbol structures like this, and that mental processes could be just computations over them. Reasoning could just be computations over them. Information here about these. It's a project we can start to work on. And this, however, contrasts with an aspect of consciousness that seems very different. And this is what David Chalmers has called the hard
so we are getting to the
problem
hard
of
problem of consciousness.
In contrast,
I think that would be a good place to end this little part, and we are getting into some more hardcore stuff in the next bit. So see you there.